This is Tracy Drummond, Archivist for the Southern Labor Archives, and I am here today with Tom Lux of District Lodge 751 for the IAM, and we are going to be talking about his history with the Union. Today is November 20th, 2013. We are at Bally's in Las Vegas, and thank you, Tom, for agreeing to speak with me today.
Oh, you're welcome.
On the record. So let's talk about where and when you were born.
I was born in Buffalo, New York in 1946. I lived there my early life until I was about 18 and I went away to school.
Okay. So were your parents, tell me a little bit about them and growing up there. Were you in a part of New York where there are a lot of labor union members, and would you consider it a labor community that you grew up in?
Where I grew up was just north of Buffalo. It was more of the suburbs, and it wasn't a concentration of labor people. Although Buffalo itself was very unionized at that time. I didn't come from my immediate family was not union. My mother stayed at home, and my father was in management actually at Buffalo China. But some of my uncles were strong union people, and I learned some from them. But growing up it was really a great place to grow up. We had about an acre of land with the woods behind us, and as a kid that's great. But it wasn't until I was away from home that I really started to appreciate the labor movement and wanted to be involved in it.
And so you said you moved away to go to college from that area in Marquette.
Well,
was that your first experience?
First, being born in '46, I was at the very front end of the baby boom, and so when it got time to go to college, there was a lot of competition. Colleges really weren't ready for this massive amount of people. So even though I went to a good school and had good grades, it was still hard to get in. I ended up at a small college in Niagara Falls called Niagara University, and I really didn't like it there. I didn't think I was learning anything. So I transferred to Marquette, where my brother had finished his last 2 years.
Okay.
So that's how I got there.
Okay, and where's Marquette?
In Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay, and so that was your first time away from home, too.
Right, yeah.
And so what in general, so you have an older brother, any more siblings?
I've got two older brothers. One's 7 years older, and in fact he lives in Seattle now too, and one that's 4 years older, and he's still back in Buffalo.
Okay. So what was expected of the kids? Did your parents expect that you would join the military or go to college, or did you find that you sort of had the freedom to choose your own path without any pressure?
Pretty much my parents would try to guide us, but not dictate to us.
Mm-hmm.
But they did emphasize they wanted us to go to college, which in the 60s and that was the norm for a lot of people. My dad always wanted to go to college, but his older brother had quit school after two years of high school. And in those days, whatever the oldest did, the rest of the children had to follow. So he had 2 years of high school, and then he had to go to work. He always missed the chance of going to college, which he wanted to do. And my mother's family was dirt poor, and so she had to go to work early as well. So they really encouraged us to go to college, and so that was the track that I was on.
Okay. And what did you study at Marquette?
I was a philosophy major, which is You can flip burgers well with that.
Yeah?
I had a minor in political science and English.
Okay. And from there, did you head directly to grad school?
No, I looked at grad school, but I really wasn't sure just what I wanted to do at that time. And some of my friends had moved back east to Boston, and that sounded like a good idea, which I did, and got a couple office jobs in architectural firms because I was interested in architecture at the time.
Okay.
Well, still am. But so I spent about a year out there and realized I wasn't going to make any money in that type of thing. And some of my friends back in Milwaukee encouraged me to come back, and which I did, and that's when I got a job in the factory at A.O. Smith and learned welding.
Okay. But it says here that you eventually ended up at Waukesha County Technical Institute?
Waukesha.
Waukesha. Apologies.
Yeah. After I was at A.O. Smith for a while, and this was the early 70s, where safety and health was a big issue. I mean, OSHA was coming through, and you had, was it Mizaki from the chemical workers was writing books about safety and health.
It was also the time of the J.P. Stevens campaign. I don't know if you remember
yes,
that.
Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. So that became a strong interest of mine, and Waukesha County Tech, which was about a half hour west of Milwaukee, had a 2-year program in there. So I was able to transfer some of my college credits and go for about a year and a half to get the degree. And actually that's where I met my wife. She was taking the same classes. She after that got a job at where was it? They make Johnson batteries, I think it was, in Milwaukee as a safety director. About that time, or shortly after that, I started doing some traveling around the country. So I never did actually get a job in that field, although it's safety and health has always been a strong interest of mine.
Well, would you say that working and learning more about safety and health, that was maybe your seg or sort of sparked your interest in joining a union?
No, that came well before.
Okay.
When I was at Marquette, that was in the late 60s. Civil rights movement was going strong, and the anti-war movement was building up. And I got involved in both. And by being an activist and being around other activists and helping organize demonstrations and what have you, I got to learn a little bit about the history of the labor movement as a force in creating positive change. And that kind of sparked my interest and how I kind of wanted to become more active in the labor movement.
Okay. So you met your wife, Pamela.
Mm-hmm.
When you were going to Waukesha County Technical Institute. And what happened from there? You said you traveled.
Right. A friend and I had worked at A.O. Smith for about 8 years, and he had worked for the power company as a lineman for, I don't know, more than that, 10 or 12 years. And we decided, in fact, that there was a third friend that was going along originally. We decided we needed to see the country. And, I was 30, 31, and I figured that was a good time to do it.
Had y'all
kinda-
seen Easy Rider by any chance?
we weren't riding bikes.
Okay.
No. Yeah, I did see it, but no. So we planned it out. There's one friend of mine and I, Al, and how we would hit all 48 states, taking 2 or 3 years to do it. And we bought a 76 Ford van, new, and we outfitted it so we could camp. That took close to a year just to outfit it. A friend of mine at work had a garage in the back that we kept it at and worked on it. And so let's see, it was, I think in 77, I quit my job. I was politically involved for a while, then our coalition kind of split, and it wasn't so good anymore politically there. So Al and I left, and we took about 2.5, not quite 3 years traveling around the country. About midway through, or not quite midway through, we decided that this wasn't the best traveling situation, so we went back to Milwaukee. I worked at Alice Chalmers as a welder for the summer. I think he went back working climbing poles. And Pam bought his share of the van out, and he outfitted his woman friend's car and a small trailer for camping, and we traveled around together that way.
With
for
the
re-
ladies.
for the rest of the trip.
Okay. Was that more fun?
Oh yeah.
So I imagine though that was a really amazing experience. Can you remember anything in particular that happened that, you've already sort of have these activist beginnings from your undergrad.
Mhm.
Did you see anything or have any impressions, or did any of that sort of maybe strengthen your desire to be an activist? Do you remember any moments or?
Well, yeah, I was an activist in the union all the time in Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
It was a fairly large plant, anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 members in the union, depending on layoffs. And we built automobile frames because they were still being used at that time. And the union wasn't very militant, to say the least.
And which union was that?
Pardon me?
Which union?
It was a directly affiliated union,
Okay.
DALU 19806,
Okay.
the Smith Steel Workers. But it did not have an international. It was directly affiliated to the AFL-CIO.
Okay.
That was when the CIO was organizing, and a lot of the organizers were in the Communist Party. The Socialist Party was also very strong in Milwaukee, and they didn't want to associate with them. So they would organize, they believed in industrial organization, but they didn't want it to be a CIO union. So then they directly affiliate, and that's
Okay.
kind of the history of that union.
Okay. Interesting.
But I remember we used to kid that the union was kind of like the Elks Club. There was no vision of progressiveness or militancy. And at that time, and this was not just there, but all over the country, there's a lot of young workers entering the workforce. I remember Lordstown strike and all that.
Okay, let's pick up where we left off.
So this was the early 70s, and there's a lot of young workers entering the workforce, and at that time the labor movement was kind of in a bit of a malaise. You had George Meany as president, and he was proud that he never walked the picket line. So I and a few other young guys said, you know, we need our union to be a little more active, a little more progressive. And we formed a small rank and file committee, got out a monthly newsletter, and it was contract time at that time, and it put forward a lot of proposals, and gained a strong following in the shop. And then some other folks who had kind of been working in a more traditional way, you know, they're mainly stewards, and they had been there longer than most of us young guys, but they wanted to see the union be more active and confront the company in a better way, and so on. So they formed what they called the Stewards Action Committee. And around elections and contract time, we would form a coalition and work together as best we could. And so that was all through my tenure at A.O. Smith. At one point, the two committees had a bit of a falling out, and you know, most of the key positions was held by the other committee people, so we didn't fare so well. But we kept going, kept our newsletter going, still had a pretty strong following, but it was harder to win positions and so on.
And that brought it with, and that was
That was the early 70s.
the early
Or
70s.
to mid 70s,
Okay.
yeah.
And then you went on your road trip,
Mm-hmm.
and you came back. Did you go back to Milwaukee at that point?
No, actually, the plan was always to kind of end up somewhere in the Northwest.
And what appealed to you about the Northwest?
I don't know, I guess the mountains and the sea and just things we knew about it, although none of us had been there yet. And, well, actually, the original plan was end up in Alaska and sell the van and come back to the lower 48, but we didn't make it to Alaska yet. So we did end up, Pam and I looked for work in Portland at first, and Al was able to get a lineman's job with City Light in Seattle, and Donna got a teaching job in the area. So we ended up, when we couldn't find work in Portland, we came up here, or Seattle, to look for work, and I got back in a small shop that made overhead cranes as a welding inspector, because I had some history with that.
Mm-hmm. And that's Ederer?
That's Ederer Cranes.
Ederer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Pam got temporary work, temporary secretarial type work, so on. So Ederer Cranes was a local 79 shop.
Okay.
So at that point, I got involved again in the unions, this time machinist.
Was there like a 6-month probationary period before you could join, or could you join right away, or?
As I recall, if there was any probation, it was just like 30 days.
Okay.
I don't recall a long one. So I was there for a little while, and there was already a number or a group of people who were active, trying to, again, make the union a little more progressive,
Mm-hmm.
a little more active. And So I linked up with them, and we had a newsletter and ran for office, and actually won offices, and then District 160 was trying to get Local 79 to join the district. And normally I support the idea of districts, but it was the way they were trying to do it that really ticked us off. You know, the information went to only so many people, and the vote was skewed. There were a number of things. So we fought it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we were forced into District 160 anyway, and see, at that time too, the 79 was the biggest local
How many people did you have?
in the state. It was a multi-employer local.
Okay.
I forget the word for that. Anyway, I think there was about a couple thousand.
Okay.
I'm not real sure on that, but it was bigger than any of the other locals in 160, and it was the richest.
And it's called the Hope Lodge.
It's called the Hope Lodge. Yeah.
What? Do you know why it's called the Hope Lodge?
No,
No. Okay.
I don't know that history.
Okay.
So anyway, we were forced into the district. We ran for district council. We won those races. We figured if we might as well be there if we were forced in. And we started bringing up some questions about how funds were being used and so on. And before we knew it, we were put in receivership. And
The district or the local?
the local.
Okay.
The local was. And around that time I was laid off and had only 6 months recall rights at that time with our contract.
And explain what that means for people that might not know.
When you're laid off, if you have recall rights, you will be called back to the job before they hire somebody else. But after 6 months, they could go to the street.
Okay.
They didn't have to bring you back in. And because I was very active in the union, they never called me back.
And was Eder a harder company to organize, or were they?
It was already organized.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I guess then maintain a union presence. Were they anti-union, or were they?
They didn't like the union. I'm trying to think of what his title was, director or whatever, had been a scab. You know, so, but the guys there were strong union. I mean, there was no problem there. They weren't going to get rid of the union, but they could get rid of individuals. So I don't know, where are we going with that?
I don't know. But while you were at Hope Lodge 79, before you were a delegate to District 160, you were on the safety committee.
We had a safety committee.
Mm-hmm. But also on the bylaws committee. So can you talk a little bit about your role in those two committees?
The safety committee, I was a member of it, and we would try to gather information on the different shops within Local 79. Again, let's see, this was the early 80s, so the industrial safety movement was still growing, the awareness. And so we tried to get some data that would help us, propose directions and so on, and things to do to make things more safe.
Mm-hmm.
On the bylaws committee, I was appointed the chair of that, and the members at that time, they wanted to change a lot of things, so that was pretty hard. trying to keep that under control, and sifting through what would make sense and what, was just somebody's whim.
And what did you do as delegate to District 160?
There would be monthly meetings, and you'd go and you'd vote to set policy for the district. That didn't last long because we got put into receivership. So.
Okay. And then, so you said you got laid off.
Right.
And they didn't recall you within 6 months.
Right.
And in 1988, so you didn't work for
Well, I had several jobs, some non-union, some union. One of them I got at Western Gear up in Everett, and that was a machinist local as well.
Okay.
But I was there only about a year and a half before it closed down.
Okay.
It had been bought up with the intention of just milking it and closing it down. So I did work there till the end, and then after that I got another job, an inspection job, but again it was a non-union shop.
Okay.
And I'd always talk union, but never successfully organized any of those little places. From there, I'd been an inspector at several levels, but when I hired into that non-union place, this old German guy was working there as an inspector, and he taught me kind of the next level of machine parts inspecting, a lot of close tolerance in that.
So, and what did they make in that shop?
Well, they made some gears, but they did a lot of work for Boeing.
Okay.
Smaller parts. And when Schulze, the old German, got hired on at Boeing, he put in a good word for me, and I got hired on about a year later.
As an inspector?
Right, machine parts inspector,
Okay.
and was the last shop job I had. I had that for 9 years, and then the union asked me to go to joint programs.
Okay. So you were part of District 751 then, and Local Lodge 751F when you went back to work and worked at Boeing. And was your work as an inspector there any different than it had been previously, or was it?
I'd used the skills that I learned in the small shop, and Schulze had mentored me. So the skills were the same. Ended up working next to him anyway. Well, he was on first shift, I was on second, but same area. So the work was just different parts. We had the place I worked was what they call an emergent shop. So you wouldn't do a long production run. It would be, the assembly area out in the factory needed this part, but not quite for that drawing. They'd have to re-engineer it, and then we make the one off or two or three off, whatever, and then we'd inspect it. So there's a lot of variety.
And so once it looks like you got involved almost immediately with the local.
Yeah, not as immediately as I would have liked. At that same time, there was stuff happening in the neighborhood. Excuse me. Where we live, and I was chairman of our neighborhood committee.
Okay.
That we lived right by a little lake. And the developers had pushed through a zoning rechange, and they're building these massive apartment complexes with no regard for what it's going to do to the lake or the neighborhood. So we fought that, had some successes. So my first 2 or 3 years, excuse me, at Boeing, I was really involved with that. But the first chance I got to be a steward, I took it and kind of handed off the neighborhood group to some other folks
Okay.
to chair, and got more involved in the union at that point.
Okay. And you were a local lodge auditor?
Yeah. And then in the 95 strike, they made me one of the picket captains. I basically, for my shift, which I think was either a 4 or 8 hour shift, I think 8, I would make sure that everything inside the hall was being run right and smoothly so that people could be sent out to the line and so on.
You were
And
also.
then I think it was just after that strike that they asked me to be auditor. There was an opening.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Was that?
And then
Oh.
after, it wasn't too, well, maybe it was a year or two after that, they asked me to run for district council,
Okay.
which I did, and I won a alternate spot on the district council.
Okay. Well, was that the first strike you'd ever been through, the 95 strike?
No, actually going back to A.O. Smith, that had never had a strike. What year would it be? It would have been maybe 70, 74, 75, somewhere in there. The contract was up, and the militancy of the membership was up, and we had our first strike ever. It was organized in 1935. This was their first strike ever.
Mm-hmm.
Lasted a couple weeks, and we made some gains, and people accepted it. So that was my first strike.
Okay.
89 was my first strike at Boeing. So 95 would have been the next one.
Okay. So, can you tell me a little bit about the 89 strike at Boeing?
I had been at Boeing only a year, so I hadn't had much money saved up. So basically I just pulled my picket duty, but I had to find work elsewhere, which I did. So I wasn't real active other than picketing.
Mm-hmm.
95 I was very active in.
And what were some of the issues on the table for the 95 strike?
Going to test my memory here. I know in the 89 strike it was the overtime.
Okay.
I mean, they were working people out on the assembly lines week after week after week with no let up, walking around like zombies. So overtime rules were a key issue. 95, healthcare was a big issue. I don't remember if we got any pension improvements. I'd have to actually look at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were a picket captain. What are some of the responsibilities that come with that?
Okay. In the setup we had is that we'd have volunteers, maybe 4 to 6 volunteers who would come in, sit at the table where members would come and they'd assign them picket duty. There was like a dozen different gates or picket lines around the Everett plant. That's where I pulled duty. And we'd have other volunteers driving the vans, making sure they got out to their location. So I had to coordinate the vans, had to coordinate the people who were assigning the locations. And just, you know, if something wasn't going right, I had to try to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so.
Okay. And how long was that strike?
I think that one was 89 days. They came back with an offer that the union somewhat reluctantly recommended acceptance, and membership said no, very loudly, and so that one went quite a long time. It was pretty interesting.
So also during this time, you were on other committees, district staff, and retiree club treasurer. Is that something more recent since you've been retired?
Right, I was
Yeah,
just elected to that.
Okay.
Okay, so I was on district council starting in 97, 98, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on there for 4 years. And then at that same time, they had put me and a few other people into joint programs. What that is Boeing and our union in '89 negotiated a joint training program and a joint safety program. And they had in 97, it was 97, they had me and 2 other people appointed from the union to work on a project at the training section of joint programs, quality through training, to take all the hourly jobs, and there was about 500 of them, and not really write a job description because we already had those, but to write a guide, of what we called career guides, and this was mainly to aid the career advisors that we hired and had in the different offices in the plants and so on, who would help our members figure out, how do I get a better job, you know, for instance. So since those people never really worked in the factory, they needed a little help. So we were going to write these career guides to tell them, okay, what the job consists of, what skills you need, what are some of the safety issues, and what would be some basic training just to help you get that job. So we started that project, and actually there were 4 of us. But there was one program coordinator that was heading it up. The 3 of us were kind of working for him. Well, the company saw it, what we're doing, and they realized that what we're doing would help them out too.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have this employee transfer request system, which at that time you just fill out a little slip of paper and say, you know, this is my name and social security number and this is the job I'd like to get. And some of those lists were like 1,000 names long. It was a few hundred. And so you're a hiring manager and you don't know anybody on that list from whoever, and you know what they know or if they can do the job. So by creating these career guides, not only will the employee know more about the job, see if it's something that he or she wants, and what training might be necessary, but they built a system where once you got that agreed upon basic training, company and we agreed on, that you would be put into a pool. And I think it was the following contract, we got it put in, seniority had some points in there, so seniority had some count. So, and that was put online. The career advisor could pull it up on the computer right there and give the employee some advice and, you know, see, you know, what direction they want to go, which of those 500 jobs they might be suited for or having an interest in. And that smooths things out for the company too, because they actually got people who knew something about the job and took a little training for it first. So that's what I did at first when we went to joint programs.
Okay. And do you feel like it overall helped you get in better candidates for the jobs?
Absolutely.
And during this time, or maybe a little earlier, you and your wife had 2 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, while it sounds like you were very active in the union, you maybe didn't have to travel the way a Grand Lodge rep might have. But did any of this work keep you from home for any length of time, or?
No, not really.
Okay.
You know, when they would send me to Placid Harbor, but that would be for a week.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, that was probably the extent. You know, maybe a conference. You know, I was on the Machinist Council for a few years, so those would be quarterly conferences.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't away from home a whole lot.
Okay.
What was worse was working second shift, because there's a lot of things the kids would do in school that I couldn't attend.
So, is the county you're in MLK?
Martin Luther King?
Yeah, is that the county you're in?
Mm-hmm. Only county in the United States named after Martin Luther King.
Yeah, I didn't even know that existed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, it was always King County, but it was named after a pro-slave vice president, I think Vice President Pierce, maybe. And so that stuck in everybody's craw, and one of our county councilmen brought forward, well, we should change that. And after a number of years, it finally was.
Okay. And in addition to that, you've also been a member of the Pacific Northwest Labor History Association.
Right, and
Do you have any activity on their board or anything like that?
well, yes.
Okay.
Okay. The Pacific Northwest Labor History Association takes in British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. And there's not a lot of activity as much as we have a yearly conference, and we rotate that among the states and province. Last year it was down in Portland. Next year it's going to be up in BC. And the following year I'll come back to Washington. And we put out a calendar, a labor history calendar, every year. And then we, you know, go to different events like state labor council conventions and that, and have our literature table and try to promote the study of labor history. And I'm the Washington vice president.
Okay.
There's a vice president for each state or province, and as well as each grouping has some trustees to promote the labor history.
So, I imagine there are labor union members, but also maybe historians. That it's a mix of people.
You're right. There is a mix. It's some academics and some labor people. We try to keep the leadership, as far as vice presidents, labor people. But the historians or the academics are very important too. And we've built a real good rapport and working together.
As a labor archivist, I sometimes find it hard to be the person between the historians and the union members, and I don't always feel like they interact in a way that they should, that would be beneficial to them. But have you experienced any of that?
I'd say generally no.
Okay.
Not that it doesn't happen, but I mean generally, since it's like a one-year conference, we work together. They have different workshops. Some are more academic, some are more hands-on. So I think it works out pretty well. Plus, in Seattle anyway, we have the Harry Bridges Center for Labor Studies at the University of Washington, which again, some of the same people are involved with. I'm on the visiting committee for them, and some of the people are out of the shop, and some are retired like myself. Others are academics. The state labor council president's on the committee. So we try really hard to utilize all the resources that we have. And it was the Harry Bridges Center that put forward, and the ILWU, who put forward the idea of having a labor archive. Because a lot of the stuff in the UW archives related to labor, but nobody organized it as such. And ILWU put in a big chunk of money to support that, and then other unions put in money as well, including the machinists, and we've been supporting that right along. And it's a great archive. Connor Casey
I know Connor
is doing a very good job there.
Yeah. Excellent. Since 2010, you've been part of the Aerospace Joint Apprenticeship Committee. So if it's Aerospace Joint Apprenticeship, is that coming from different unions?
Actually, that was pushed by the Machinists Union.
Okay.
Our political director, Larry Brown, did a lot of lobbying down in Olympia, the capital, to get some money to establish an aerospace apprenticeship program. Reason being is you have Boeing, which is so big, and Boeing had its joint apprenticeship committee, meaning labor and management sat on the committee. But there's nothing for the 600 suppliers in the state. And we see the need to not only keep up the skills to keep the aerospace in Washington State, but to improve them. And so the legislature agreed to that and gave a stipend every year through the college system that goes to the Aerospace Joint Apprenticeship Committee. Is just that. It just deals with the apprentices. There's also the Aerospace Machinist Joint Training Committee. And that is the nonprofit that funnels that money not only to the Apprenticeship Committee, but to other training programs that we're developing that relate to aerospace and the community colleges.
Is this the first apprenticeship committee you've ever participated on?
No, I was also on the Boeing, Boeing Apprenticeship Committee for a number of years before I retired.
Okay.
And that was one of the reasons they asked me to serve on this one as well.
How many participants do y'all usually have?
On what?
Well, how many apprentices do y'all usually?
That's growing all the time. Right now, I think it's close to 200, and it's been steadily growing and actually kind of snowballing, because as these smaller companies realize the value of having an apprenticeship, they sign on to do that. The people we've hired to run that program are just doing a great job. Fantastic. Things like that go beyond apprenticeships, like there are 5 community colleges throughout Washington that have some sort of a A&P program. That's airframe and power plant, which is a certification, 2-year certification that the FAA requires for certain people to work on airplanes. In fact, Boeing now requires that people on the flight line have an A&P license. Well, they all had different programs. It was not interchangeable. And the director of AMJAC that we hired was able to sit them all down in a room several times to finally get some commonality, and then work with the FAA to accept the program, because that's another slow-moving wheel. And now, also the A&P program is kind of an American thing. Over in Europe, they have, I'm forgetting the acronym, but it's another program that's actually, I don't know if it's better, but for certain things it would be necessary, because some require the European license. She has been able to interest the community colleges in also dealing with that training.
Do y'all see the apprenticeship program as kind of also a mentoring program to sort of support younger workers, and, or I guess it's maybe not just younger, but mainly younger?
It definitely is. And you're right, it's not always younger workers, but I'd say 90% of the time it is. And what we're also trying to do is get more people of color and women involved in that industry, which is hard, because it's not a traditional, especially for women, it's not a traditional industry. But the apprenticeship program tries to promote that as much as possible. And they're working, we're working on other things too, by making connection with the high schools. We help build up their shops so that they can train their kids during the day, and then we can use it at night with the apprentices. As you know, a lot of high schools gave up their shops years ago, and because everybody was going to 4-year colleges. Well, that didn't work out so well. So.
So in 2011, you joined or were elected to the Puget Sound Advocates for Retirement Action.
Mm-hmm.
And is that sort of a group that only works with union groups, or is that for retirees in general? Because you retired in 2011.
Correct.
Right.
I'd say retirees in general, although it's connected with the National ARA, Alliance for Retired Americans. And although we can't use the Alliance name because we're a local community group, but we're affiliated with the Washington State Alliance. Okay. So it's got the same philosophy. It's got the connection with the AFL-CIO. We're recognized by the King County Labor Council as well as the State Labor Council. But not everybody who works with PSARA, Puget Sound Advocates, is a union member. So we have some community folks as well, but it's heavily union, yes.
Mm-hmm. And what do you do?
We're a real activist group, much more than the ARA itself.
Mm-hmm.
We not only fight around issues around Social Security and Medicare, which is kind of a core, but we lent our weight to get sick days for all workers in Seattle. That passed. Trying to think of some of the other we're always weekly we're at some demonstration. We support the Walmart workers. We support anybody on strike. We support any progressive thing going on. We support the Gay Pride parade. Whatever's going on in town that's progressive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're there.
Okay.
That's what we have the reputation of always showing up with our banner.
Okay. Well, and I think that's a good seg into one of the things we came here specifically to talk about, which is going to Ohio this year with representing the machinists and knocking on doors, and in a state where I understand that Barack Obama was down by 10 points. It's a swing state that y'all helped win Ohio for the Democrats. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yes. Can I get some water first?
Yes. Okay, so you were just about to tell me a little bit about going to Ohio and why you wanted to be part of that.
Well, the election was coming up, and Charlie talked to me and told me about his idea of having some retirees in Ohio to help out with the campaign. And being from Seattle, my area was fairly safe. We weren't worried so much about our elections, but they were worried about Ohio. So I thought about it for a while and talked to Pam, and because it was going to be for about a month or better. And the only time I had really taken that much time away from home before was when we went to South Carolina to try to stop a decertification there.
At the Boeing plant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that was about a month as well. But anyway, after thinking about it, I thought it'd be an experience and something worthwhile to do. If you can help out, I wanted to. So I decided to do it. Got out there, and we started in Toledo, I believe, and we would spend the day knocking on doors. We'd get a list in the morning that was already figured out, and mainly union members. And we do that all day. They got a few staff people from DC, not DC, from headquarters, who would drive us around. And we'd pop out of the car, go up to the door, see if people were home. And if they weren't, we'd leave the literature. And then if we got in a little early, they might want us to do some phone calling, which I hate. I don't mind knocking on doors. I hate bothering people on the phone. But you do it. We were there for about a week, and then they said Akron needed help. So they took us all over there, and the Toledo people were headed to see us go because we were a big help to them, and there was about close to 10 of us at the time. But we did the same thing in Akron, and at one point they took about half the group and sent them back to Toledo, so they split us up. But we were going gangbusters. I mean, going through the lists, like other people there had never seen.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody kind of liked us for that. But it was quite the experience.
And were you reaching out mainly to former retired union members, or active union members, or whoever might be in a neighborhood?
It was mainly active union members that they had lists for. I don't recall if they separated the retirees out, but it was mainly people who were working.
Okay.
Let me think on that for a minute. I'm not really sure anymore, but anyway, I think it was a mix.
Okay. Did you have any encounters with people who were not interested in hearing what you had to say?
Actually, surprisingly, not that much.
Okay.
My experience was, if they weren't interested, they didn't show it. They were just polite and took the literature and listened to you. I didn't have any really bad experiences. People were friendly, and many people were on our side. So it was good getting them the information, encouraging them to vote, and so on. It was for the most part, a positive experience.
Okay. And so, talking about that, and some of the other things we've discussed, advocacy is clearly very important to you, whether it's in your community or for the union. Can you talk a little bit about how that's benefited you? Or a lot about how that's benefited you over the years?
I don't know. I don't always.
Or why it's been important to you?
Yeah, it's important because I feel strongly that change is necessary. That laborers and people in general are under attack constantly, and unless you fight back, you're sunk. So it's better to fight back and try to win some battles. I'm not one to just sit on the sidelines and watch that happen. So I'd rather be in there doing what I can to change it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what it does for me, I guess it just fulfills that need not to watch everything go down and not have a say in it.
Okay. With the machinist starting the Young Machinist program, where there are mentoring relationships between older or retired machinists and incoming people. That seems to be filling a gap where maybe there wasn't that kind of encouragement for a while. Did you see that in the places you worked where maybe younger folks were coming in and they weren't as aware of what it took to get the contract that they worked under? Maybe there was apathy?
Well, yes. Especially when I started, there was a generational divide of how you view things, and that was what I described before about the young workers coming in the early 70s and being more militant, or at least more willing to be militant, and the older workers just kind of not so much. I think that's changed quite a bit. And I think the program we're starting with the young machinists is definitely in the right direction, because it's not enough to just assume that they'll get involved. I think it's good to show them the ropes, because when I was starting out, nobody really showed me the ropes. I had to trip and fall and stumble and still get where I was going. But there's a lot to be said about learning from others and moving forward that way.
One of the other things you have listed here is that you were recently appointed to the Board of Trustees for the Shoreline Community College. Tell me about your role in that.
Okay, again, I just got that appointment, so I won't be at my first meeting till I think it's December 4th. But a number of people had called me up and said, do you know that Shoreline has a position open, and we think that your experience would bode well for taking that position. And I kind of grumbled at first, but then I figured, well, if I don't do it, then, because they wanted somebody from labor on the committee. So I decided to apply for it, and after quite a while, the governor did appoint me. I still got to be approved by the Senate, but I guess that's sometimes takes a long time. But in the meantime, now I'll be serving. So, and I think it's important for, with my experience with the community colleges and the job I had at joint programs and machinists, I see the community college system that we have as a good one, but also very important for, again, keeping the skill base up, and training young folks into a job that would be worthwhile, something they like, and so I decided to take it. I think it's an important role that labor can play to help the community colleges actually reflect those in the community.
So you've talked a lot about helping people in the community, apprentices, things like that. Can you think of any mentors that have been important to you in your growth as a machinist and as a person? You mentioned Schultze earlier.
Yeah, Schultze for sure. He was a funny old guy. Yeah, he helped me a lot. When I was at A.O. Smith, there were a number of people, who helped me with this or that. And the machinists, a number of people. Sue Palmer's helped me. Larry Brown's helped me. A number of Mark Blondin. With one thing or another, and then not so much as a mentor all the way through, as at one point, why don't you do this? It'll be good, or here's how to do this, and then
Okay. Have your kids picked up this sort of desire to be activist?
No, I really failed on that one. My daughter Katie works at Boeing, and we're still trying to get her active. There's still hope for her.
Okay. And it says she was born in Korea?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, both her children are adopted.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. So, but she works there as a union member. She just hasn't really become active.
She's a machinist member. Yeah.
Okay. And what does John do?
Right now he's driving a tow truck.
Okay.
So it's a non-union job, but it's paying the bills, kind of.
Yeah.
He's still trying to find his way.
Okay. And I think we're about done. Is there anything you want to add that we didn't cover, or anything you want to say about being in the union, or what it's done for you, or?
Oh wow! I mean that's big. The union's been my life. It's gotten me everything I have now. I firmly believe that any worker, all workers, need a union, regardless of what their job is. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out. But yeah, it's been my life. Still is.
Well, thank you very much for agreeing to sit with me today for this interview. I'm pleased that we were able to get this on digital file, I guess not on tape, which is what I almost said. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.